For a woman like Hazel, a retired anthropology professor, life was a collection of observable patterns. She found comfort in logic, in evidence, in the quiet truths that human behavior reveals if you watch closely enough. But the truth she was about to uncover, hiding behind apartment door 3B, was a pattern so monstrous, so illogical, it would shatter everything she thought she knew about the family she loved. She stood in the hallway, her heart a quiet, frantic drum against her ribs. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack, a careless mistake that would unravel a universe of lies. From inside, she could hear a voice, her daughter-in-law, Chloe's voice, but it was a voice she had never heard before. It wasn't the sharp, confident tone of the ambitious career woman she knew. It was soft, cooing, impossibly tender. "Oh no, Hazel, children are just not for me. I don't have that maternal instinct, you know. Honestly, I just don't like kids." And there, in the soft afternoon light, was the lie made flesh. Chloe, the woman who hated children, was gently pushing a toy car across the floor, making soft vroom vroom sounds. The little boy giggled, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. Hazel felt the air leave her lungs. She pulled back from the door, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy with shock. She raised it, her hand trembling, and through the small screen, she zoomed in. The little boy turned his head, just for a second, to look at his mother. And in that moment, Hazel saw it. It wasn't just any child. The boy had her son's eyes. He had Leo's smile. He was the living, breathing ghost of the husband his own mother pretended he never had. And Hazel knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had just stumbled upon a secret that would either save her son or destroy him completely. To truly understand the depth of such a staggering lie, you must first understand the life it was methodically poisoning. On the surface, from the carefully curated photos they posted online, Leo and Chloe Johnson had the perfect life, the kind you see in the glossy pages of home and lifestyle magazines. He was a talented, kind-hearted, and increasingly successful architect, a man who designed beautiful, sturdy homes for others, filled with the light and space he hoped would one day fill his own. She was a chic and successful art consultant, a woman who moved with a sharp, modern confidence through the exclusive galleries and high-stakes auction houses of the city. They were a definitive power couple, handsome, successful, and to anyone looking in from the outside, deeply and enviably in love. Or so it seemed. Hazel, Leo's mother, had always been their quietest, most devoted supporter. A recently retired professor of anthropology, she was a woman who found her joy not in the grand gestures of life, but in observing the small, intricate cultures of human connection. After her husband, a fellow professor, had passed away from a sudden illness, her son, Leo, became the undisputed center of her universe. She adored him. He had his father's gentle, patient spirit and her own inquisitive, analytical mind. And when he brought Chloe home 6 years prior, a whirlwind of energy and ambition, Hazel had welcomed her with open, hopeful arms. Chloe was everything. She was not bold, assertive, unapologetically modern. She seemed to make her quiet, thoughtful son happy, and for Hazel, a mother who wanted nothing more than her child's joy, that was all that mattered. The wedding, 5 years ago, was a beautiful, modern affair held in a renovated art gallery downtown. Hazel had watched her son, looking so handsome in his tailored suit, look at his bride with an expression of such pure, unadulterated love that it brought a flood of happy tears to her eyes. She believed with all her heart that this was the beginning of his true happiness, the start of a new, beautiful, and fruitful branch on their family tree. In the quiet moments since her own husband's passing, she had allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of the day she would hold her grandchildren, of filling her quiet, book-lined home with the joyful chaos of their laughter, of teaching them the names of the birds in her garden, of passing down the stories and traditions of their family like a precious, living heirloom. But that dream, she soon learned, was a solitary one. The issue of children became the single, silent fault line running just beneath the perfect surface of her son's marriage. It was a topic that was brought up, gently at first, with the well-meaning but clumsy inquiries of relatives at family gatherings. A well-meaning aunt would pat Chloe's stomach and ask with a wink, "So, when are we going to hear the pitter-patter of little feet?" A cousin, bouncing a newborn on his hip, would offer, "Your turn next, you two. It's the best thing you'll ever do." And Chloe's reaction was always the same, a performance of practiced ease. She would produce a tight, bright, polite smile and deliver a perfectly rehearsed, almost clinical response. "Oh no, not for me," she would say with a light, dismissive laugh that never quite reached her eyes. "My career is my baby right now. Besides, I just don't have that maternal instinct, you know. Never have." Then she would turn to Leo, a silent command in her eyes, and he would immediately jump to her defense, a loyal soldier protecting his queen. "We're happy as we are, Aunt Carol," he'd say, putting a protective arm around his wife's shoulders. "Not everyone needs kids to feel complete. Our life is full." But Hazel, the quiet observer, the anthropologist in her own family, saw something else. She saw the lie not in Chloe's words, but in her son's eyes. She saw the flicker of deep, profound sadness that he would quickly try to hide every time the subject came up. She saw the way his gaze would linger a little too long on his cousins as they played with their children in the park, a look of quiet, intense longing on his face. She saw the baby clothes catalogs that would occasionally arrive in the mail, addressed to him, which would quickly and quietly disappear into the recycling bin before Chloe could see them. Leo, in his deep and abiding love for his wife, publicly supported her choice. He defended her, he protected her, but in the quiet moments, in the unguarded expressions on his face, Hazel saw the heartbreaking truth. Her son desperately wanted to be a father, and he was sacrificing his deepest desire for the woman he loved. The subject became a source of quiet, unspoken tension between Hazel and her daughter-in-law. Hazel, against her better judgment, tried to approach it once, just once, in the gentlest way she knew how. They were having tea in Hazel's sun-drenched garden on a warm spring afternoon. "Chloe, dear," she began, her voice soft, "I know it's not my place, and please forgive me for asking, but I see the look in Leo's eyes sometimes. Are you sure? Are you absolutely certain that this is a door you want to close forever?" The change in Chloe was instantaneous and chilling. The warm, friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. She placed her delicate teacup down on its saucer with a sharp, definitive click. "Hazel," she said, her voice dangerously calm and precise, "I love your son more than anything. But my body, my life, and my choices are my own. I am not a vessel for his or anyone else's expectations. Let me be perfectly clear so there is no misunderstanding. I do not like children. They are loud, they are messy, and they are a professional liability that I have no interest in taking on. This is not up for discussion, now or ever. Do you understand?" The finality in her tone was absolute. The conversation was over, and a new, colder, and much thicker wall had just been erected between them. From that day on, Hazel never mentioned it again. She watched her son dim a little more each year, his quiet dream of fatherhood slowly, painfully, dying within him. And she watched Chloe, now unchallenged, build her lie into an unbreachable fortress. Chloe wasn't just ambivalent about children. She began to perform a theatrical, almost aggressive, dislike of them. At family events, if a curious toddler approached her, she would visibly recoil as if from a snake. She would make sharp, critical comments about other people's parenting styles, always loud enough for the parents to hear. She made "I hate kids" her defining unapologetic personality trait, a shield to deflect any further questions. Leo, ever the loyal husband, would just sigh, a deep, weary sound, and apologize for her behavior to the offended relatives. He accepted it. He accepted the sacrifice. He had no idea the sacrifice was entirely, cruelly, and senselessly unnecessary. A lie, a really big one, isn't just a single statement. It's an entire world that has to be built, maintained, and defended day after day. For 5 years, Chloe was the tireless architect of a world in which she was a woman who despised motherhood. It was a masterful, and in hindsight, a deeply disturbing performance. She didn't just state her dislike for children, she wove it into the very fabric of her identity, reinforcing it with 1,000 small, convincing details. Her career, art consulting for wealthy clients, became her most effective alibi. It was demanding, she would explain to anyone who asked, requiring frequent, last-minute travel. "I was in Milan all last week for an auction," she'd say at a Sunday dinner, her voice laced with a sophisticated weariness. "And next month it's a private gallery opening in Tokyo." A child? It would be utterly impossible. It would be unfair to everyone. She painted a picture of a glamorous, jet-setting life where a child would be nothing more than an anchor, a heavy weight dragging her down from the stratosphere of her ambitions. It was a convincing narrative, and Leo, who was so proud of her success, would just nod in agreement, his own dreams silently suffocating under the weight of her fabricated career. Her social media was another stage for this performance. It was a carefully curated gallery of her child-free life, pictures of her and Leo at exclusive art galas, sipping champagne, spontaneous weekend trips to wine country, selfies of her working late in her sleek minimalist office. There was never a picture of a niece or nephew, never a sentimental post about a friend's new baby. Her online persona was a testament to adult freedom, a world of ambition, travel, and sophisticated leisure, with no room for the messy, unpredictable reality of a child. But Hazel, with her anthropologist's eye for the details that don't fit, began to notice the inconsistencies, the small hairline cracks in Chloe's perfect, childless facade. They were tiny things, easily dismissed on their own, but when pieced together, they began to form a troubling mosaic. There was the matter of the business trips. They were, as Chloe claimed, frequent and often sudden, but they were also strangely patterned. They almost always seemed to fall over 3-day weekends or minor holidays, times when most international business, especially in the art world, would slow down. And afterward, when Hazel would ask about the trip, Chloe's answers were always vague. "Oh, you know, just meetings." Very boring stuff. She never had a specific anecdote, never a story about a particular piece of art or a difficult client. For a woman so passionate about her career, her descriptions of it were oddly generic and lifeless. Then there were the finances. Hazel was not a nosy woman, but she and Leo still shared a family financial advisor, a man named George, who had handled their affairs for years. During a routine review of her own portfolio, George let a small comment slip. "Leo is certainly generous with his sister," he'd remarked. Hazel was confused. "Leo doesn't have a sister," she replied. George's face went pale. "Oh," he said, quickly trying to backtrack. "My mistake. I must have misread the name on the wire transfer. Just a regular transfer he makes." Never mind. But the word had been said, sister. Leo was sending a significant amount of money, regularly, to someone George had mistaken for a close relative. When Hazel gently asked Leo about it, he became flustered. "Oh, that," he said dismissively. "It's for Chloe, an old college friend of hers who is a struggling single mother. Chloe likes to help her out anonymously. She has such a good heart." The explanation seemed plausible, but it felt thin. It didn't fit with the woman who visibly recoiled from children at family parties. The most disturbing cracks, however, were the phone calls. Chloe's phone was like an extension of her hand, always present, always guarded. Hazel began to notice a pattern. Several times when they were together, Chloe's phone would ring. She would glance at the screen, and a fleeting, almost imperceptible look of panic would cross her face. She would immediately stand up and walk into another room to take the call, her voice a low, urgent murmur. One afternoon, Hazel was in the kitchen when one of these calls came in. Chloe had rushed out onto the back patio, but she hadn't closed the sliding glass door completely, and Hazel heard it, a few clear, distinct words in Chloe's hushed, anxious tone. "Another fever? Did you call the doctor?" No, I can't come now. I'll be there on Friday. Just give him a hug for me." A fever. The doctor. Give him a hug for me. These were not the words of an art consultant dealing with a client. These were the words of a mother. Hazel felt a cold chill run down her spine. She didn't say anything. She just stored the observation away, another piece of data in a growing, terrifying puzzle. Her son, blinded by love, saw only the beautiful, child-free world Chloe had constructed for him. But Hazel was beginning to see the hidden architecture of the lie, the secret rooms and hidden passages. She didn't know what she was looking for yet. She didn't know the shape of the secret. But she knew, with the unshakable certainty of a mother's intuition, that something was terribly fundamentally wrong. The human mind has a remarkable capacity for denial. It can see a dozen inconsistencies, a dozen red flags, and still weave them into a story that it wants to believe. For months, Hazel had been collecting these troubling little pieces of data, the vague business trips, the secret phone calls, the unexplained finances, but she had kept them in separate locked rooms in her mind. To put them all together on one table would be to admit that the portrait of her son's happy marriage was a forgery, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. It would take one more lie, one so blatant and so personal, to force her to finally turn the key and face the truth. The catalyst was her 70th birthday. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion. Leo, bless his heart, had been planning it for months. He rented out the small, elegant private room at their favorite local restaurant, a place filled with warm memories of family celebrations with his father. He'd invited all of Hazel's closest friends, her old colleagues from the university, and all the cousins and aunts she held dear. It was meant to be a celebration of her life, a testament to the family she had nurtured. A week before the party, Chloe called Hazel, her voice a symphony of practiced regret. "Oh, Hazel, I am absolutely devastated," she began. "You are not going to believe this. The gallery I consult for in Chicago just called. The International Art Fair, the biggest event of the year, they had a last-minute cancellation, and they've offered me a premier booth. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for my career. But it's this weekend. The same weekend as your party." Hazel felt a familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. "Oh," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What a shame." "I am just heartbroken," Chloe continued, her performance flawless. "I tried to get out of it, I really did. I told them it was my mother-in-law's 70th birthday, but they were insistent. Leo is so disappointed, but he understands. He knows this is my dream. We'll celebrate properly with you as soon as I get back, I promise." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly constructed. It was built around her career, her ambition, the very things that made her seem admirable. It was unassailable. To question it would be to seem petty, to be questioning her success. So Hazel just said, "Of course, dear. I understand. We'll miss you." The party was beautiful. Leo had outdone himself. The room was filled with flowers and laughter. Her friends gave loving, funny speeches. But for Hazel, there was a shadow in the corner of the room, a ghost at the feast. She watched her son play the part of the perfect host, but she saw the forced brightness in his smile, the slight slump in his shoulders. He was trying so hard to be happy for her, but his own disappointment was a palpable thing. When the time came to cut the cake, and everyone sang happy birthday, she saw him look instinctively to the empty chair beside him, the one meant for his wife, and for a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, revealing a look of profound loneliness. Later that evening, as a friend was driving her home, Hazel found herself replaying Chloe's words in her head. The International Art Fair in Chicago, something about it felt off. As an academic, her mind was trained to question, to verify. It was an instinct she couldn't turn off. When she got home, in the quiet of her study, surrounded by her books on human culture and ritual, she did something she felt a deep pang of guilt about. She opened her laptop. She felt like a spy in her own family. She typed, "International Art Fair Chicago 2024" into the search engine. The results loaded instantly. The official website for the event was the first link. Her heart was pounding. She clicked on it. The homepage was bright and professional, filled with pictures of art and artists, and there, in large, bold letters, were the dates of the event: the 12th of April, the 14th of April. Hazel froze. She looked at the calendar on her computer screen. Today was the 20th of April. Her birthday party was on the 20th of April. The art fair in Chicago had ended almost a week ago. The lie was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, a cold, hard, undeniable fact. Chloe was not in Chicago. So the question, the terrifying, world-altering question, was, where was she? And why did she need such an elaborate, easily disproven lie? The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Every other red flag, every other inconsistency she had so carefully locked away, now came flooding out. the secret phone calls, the money transfers to an unknown sister, the vague trips that always fell on a weekend. They weren't separate, unrelated incidents anymore. They were all threads. Threads that, when pulled, all led back to this one monumental deception. She leaned back in her chair, the glow of the computer screen illuminating the profound sadness on her face. The denial was over. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine. She could no longer protect her son from a truth she herself was hiding from. Her love for Leo was a fierce, protective thing, but she now realized that true protection wasn't about shielding him from pain. It was about arming him with the truth. She didn't know what she would find. She was terrified of the answer, but she knew she could not, would not, stop until she found it. Her quiet life of retirement was over. The anthropologist was about to begin her most difficult and heartbreaking field study yet, the secret life of her own daughter-in-law. The days following her 70th birthday were, for Hazel, a masterclass in quiet deception. On the surface, she was the same calm, intellectual woman she had always been. She tended to her garden, she met her friends for coffee. She spoke to Leo on the phone and listened patiently as he relayed Chloe's fabricated stories of success at the art fair. She offered the appropriate words of encouragement, played the part of the proud mother-in-law. All the while, a cold, methodical investigation was taking shape in the privacy of her study. She was no longer just a mother, she was a researcher, and her daughter-in-law was her unwilling subject. Her first step was to return to the financial thread, the mysterious wire transfers that George, the financial advisor, had mentioned. She knew she couldn't ask him directly again. It would raise too many alarms. So, she used a different approach. She invited Leo over for dinner, under the guise of wanting to thank him properly for the beautiful birthday party. She cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, filling the house with the comforting aromas of his childhood. It was a calculated act of maternal love, designed to lower his defenses. After dinner, as they sat in her cozy living room, she broached the subject with a carefully crafted casualness. "You know, dear," she began, "I was doing some of my own financial planning the other day, and it got me thinking. You are so wonderfully generous to Chloe's friend, the single mother. It's such a noble thing to do." Leo shifted uncomfortably in his armchair. "Oh, well, it's mostly Chloe's doing. She has a big heart." "She certainly does," Hazel agreed, her voice smooth as silk. "I was just thinking, with tax season coming up, donations to a single mother can sometimes be considered a charitable gift. I have a wonderful accountant who might be able to help you organize that properly, maybe even get a deduction. What is the woman's name again? I'd be happy to pass her information along." It was a perfect, logical trap. She wasn't asking for personal information. She was offering help. She watched as panic flickered in her son's eyes. He was a terrible liar. "Oh no, Mom, that's not necessary," he stammered, his face flushing slightly. It's a very private arrangement. Chloe prefers to keep it completely anonymous. The woman is very proud. It would embarrass her." "I see," Hazel said, her expression betraying nothing. Of course, anonymity is very noble. But in her mind, a bright red light was flashing. The secrecy, the fumbling explanation, it was no longer just a suspicion. It was a confirmation. The money was not going to a friend. It was going somewhere Chloe did not want anyone, especially Hazel, to know about. Her next step was more direct. She needed to understand the pattern of Chloe's absences. She began to keep a private journal, a field notebook, documenting Chloe's comings and goings. She'd call their house on a Friday afternoon. "Oh, Chloe just left for a last-minute trip to a gallery in Boston," Leo would explain. "She'll be back late on Sunday." Hazel would dutifully write it down. Boston, Friday, Sunday. A few weeks later, it was a conference in Philadelphia. Then an art-buying trip to a private estate in the countryside. The destinations changed, but the pattern was always the same. She would leave on a Friday and return on a Sunday. It was the schedule not of a high-flying art consultant, but of someone with a weekend commitment, a weekend life. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that would give her a direction, came from a place she least expected it. It came from the mail. One afternoon, while picking up her own mail, she saw a letter sticking out of Leo and Chloe's mailbox. It was from a company she didn't recognize, Oak Ridge Children's Academy. It looked like a school brochure or a tuition bill. Thinking it was a mistake, a piece of junk mail, she almost ignored it, but then her anthropologist's brain kicked in. Why would a childless couple be receiving mail from a children's academy? She couldn't bring herself to take the letter. That was a line she wouldn't cross, but the name was now burned into her memory. That evening, back in her study, she looked up Oak Ridge Children's Academy. It was a prestigious and very expensive private preschool and daycare center. And it was located in a quiet, affluent suburb nearly an hour's drive away, a town called Northwood, a town where they had no friends, no family, no professional connections. A cold, dawning horror began to creep over her. The weekend trips, the secret money, the mail from a children's academy in a town an hour away. The pieces were no longer separate. They were clicking into place, forming a picture so monstrous, so unthinkable, that she could barely bring herself to look at it. But she had to. She had to see it with her own eyes. The next Friday, she got in her car. She knew from a casual call to Leo that Chloe was supposedly on another business trip, this time to Washington, D.C. Hazel didn't drive to the airport. She drove to Northwood. She found the Oak Ridge Children's Academy, and she waited. She parked her car across the street, her heart a frantic, painful drum against her ribs. She felt like a voyeur, a trespasser on a terrible secret. She didn't know what she expected to find. But she knew, with every fiber of her being, that whatever it was, it would change their lives forever. The air in Hazel's car was thick and still, the silence broken only by the frantic, painful drumming of her own heart against her ribs. She sat parked across the street from the Oak Ridge Children's Academy, a quaint, expensive-looking brick building that seemed to mock her with its cheerful, primary-colored sign and perfectly manicured lawn. Every time a new car pulled into the small parking lot, her stomach would clench, a sickening knot of dread and anticipation. She felt a profound sense of shame, sitting there like a private investigator, a spy in her own family's life. But the need to know, the desperate, clawing need to understand the lie that had taken root in the heart of her family, was stronger than her shame. She had to see, she had to know. She had been waiting for nearly an hour, watching as nannies and parents came and went, a parade of normal family life that felt like it was from another planet. She was just about to give up, to dismiss the lead as a dead end, when she saw it. It wasn't Chloe's sleek, modern SUV. It was a modest, older model sedan, a car she had never seen before. The car pulled into a parking spot, and a woman got out of the driver's side. She was pleasant-looking, perhaps in her late 50s, dressed in a simple floral dress. A nanny, Hazel guessed. A caregiver? The woman walked with a brisk, no-nonsense air around to the passenger side and opened the back door. And from the back seat, a small boy no older than 4 scrambled out. He had a head of beautiful, unruly, curly dark hair and was clutching a well-loved, slightly battered stuffed dinosaur. Hazel's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, even from across the street, even through the tinted glass of her car. The resemblance was uncanny, breathtaking. The boy had her son's walk, that same slightly pigeon-toed, thoughtful gait that Leo had as a child. He had her son's profile, the same gentle slope of his nose, the same determined set of his small chin. She watched, her heart aching with a mixture of shock and a strange, terrible recognition. As the little boy ran towards the school's playground, the woman following closely behind him. He was a ghost of a childhood she had loved and cherished, a painful living echo of her own son, Leo, brought to life in this strange, unfamiliar town. She stayed there for another hour, a silent, invisible sentinel, her eyes never leaving the small boy. She watched him climb the jungle gym with a fearless energy. She watched him share his snack with another child. He seemed happy, energetic, and well cared for. But as the afternoon wore on and other parents began to arrive, she noticed something else. She saw a look of quiet watchfulness in his eyes as he scanned the faces of the arriving adults. It was a look she recognized from her years as a professor, studying human behavior. It was the look of a child who is waiting for someone specific, someone they are longing to see. Just after 5 o'clock, her vigil was rewarded. A different car pulled into the lot, a sleek, silver SUV, her son's SUV. Hazel's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white, but it wasn't Leo who got out of the driver's side, it was Chloe, and she looked different. Gone was the sharp, professional power suit of the art consultant. Gone were the severe architectural heels. Instead, she was dressed in simple, comfortable jeans and a soft cashmere sweater. Her hair, usually styled in a severe, elegant chignon, was pulled back in a simple, loose ponytail. She looked softer. She looked younger. She looked like a mother coming to pick up her child. The moment the little boy saw Chloe's SUV, his entire demeanor changed. The quiet watchfulness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy that it seemed to light up the entire playground. He dropped his stuffed dinosaur in the wood chips without a second thought and ran, his little legs pumping, across the green lawn. "Mommy!" His small, clear voice carried across the quiet street. A single, happy word that pierced Hazel's heart like a shard of glass. Chloe didn't just greet him. She dropped to her knees on the grass, her arms open wide, and caught him in a fierce, desperate, loving embrace. She buried her face in his curly hair, and from across the street, Hazel could see her shoulders shaking with what looked like silent, pent-up sobs. This wasn't the calm, collected, child-averse woman from family dinners. This was a mother reunited with the center of her universe. Hazel watched as Chloe spoke with the other woman, the caregiver, for a few moments, her movements brisk and discreet as she handed over a thick white envelope, undoubtedly filled with cash. A business transaction to conclude a week of outsourced love. Then, Chloe took her son's hand, and they walked back to the car. They didn't drive away immediately. For a long, painful 10 minutes, they just sat in the car. Hazel could see their silhouettes against the setting Sunday. She watched Chloe turn in her seat, stroking the little boy's hair, her head leaning against his in the back seat. A perfect, private portrait of maternal love so profound, it was almost unbearable to witness. This was not a woman who hated children. This was a woman who was desperately, secretly, and completely in love with her own. The truth, when it finally and brutally assembled itself in Hazel's mind, was more complex and more heartbreaking than she could have ever prepared for. The weekend business trips were not business trips. They were clandestine pilgrimages to Northwood, where Chloe would shed her skin as the ambitious, child-free art consultant and become, for 48 precious stolen hours, just mommy. The secret money transfers that Leo so naively believed were for an anonymous friend were, in fact, the salary for a full-time caregiver. The tuition for an expensive private school, and the rent for the entire secret life she had constructed around the son she was hiding from the world. A wave of nausea and a dizzying sense of vertigo washed over Hazel. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, anchoring herself to reality. She finally had the answer. But the answer only created 1,000 more questions, each one more painful than the last. Why? Why the elaborate, cruel, and exhausting deception? Why would she hide this beautiful child, her own son, from his own father, from his own family? Why would she force her husband, the man she claimed to love, to mourn a dream of fatherhood that had, in fact, come true nearly 5 years ago? The lie was so pointless, so needlessly cruel, so profoundly illogical, it defied all rational explanation. She watched as Chloe's SUV finally pulled out of the parking lot, turning back towards the city, back towards the life where she pretended her son, this little boy with Leo's eyes and Leo's smile, didn't exist. Hazel didn't follow. She just sat there, her car idling, the silence now filled with the ghost of a child's happy shout. The investigation was over. She had the truth. A truth so heavy, so devastating, it felt like it could crush them all. She thought of her son, Leo, at home at that very moment, waiting for his wife to return from her business trip, completely oblivious, believing his life was childless, his heart still carrying a quiet ache that had no reason to be there. The injustice of it all, the sheer monumental waste of years of lost love and lost connection, made her heart ache with a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. She had found the secret. Now, she was faced with an even more terrible question. What in God's name was she supposed to do with it? The drive home from Northwood was a blur. Hazel couldn't remember the turns she took or the traffic lights she stopped at. Her mind was a chaotic storm of images and emotions. The little boy's joyful run across the grass, the desperate tenderness in Chloe's embrace, the profound, unknowing sadness in her own son's eyes. She felt like a character in a Greek tragedy, a messenger who had just been given a terrible, world-shattering prophecy that she now had to deliver. The truth was a physical weight in her car, sitting in the passenger seat beside her, heavy and menacing. When she arrived home, the quiet of her book-lined study, usually a source of comfort and peace, felt suffocating. She didn't turn on the lights. She just sank into her familiar leather armchair, the one her husband had always sat in, and let the darkness envelop her. For hours, she just sat there, replaying the scene at the school over and over in her mind. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a wave of profound, soul-deep anger. Not a hot, fiery anger, but a cold, hard, crystalline rage. It was an anger on behalf of her son. He was being robbed of the single greatest joy he had ever wanted. Robbed of the chance to see his own son's first steps, to hear his first words, to be a father. He was the victim of a theft so profound, it was almost unimaginable. But then, as the hours wore on, another, more complex emotion began to surface, a confusing, unwelcome flicker of empathy for Chloe. Hazel, the anthropologist, couldn't help but ask the question, what cultural, psychological, or personal pressure could be so immense that it would drive a mother to hide her own child? Was it a fear of losing her professional identity, a fear that motherhood would erase the ambitious woman she had worked so hard to become? Was it a deeper, more traumatic secret from her own past that made her terrified of a traditional family life? Or was it something even more sinister, a calculated, long-term plan to keep the child as a secret leverage, a trump card to be played in a future divorce settlement? The possibilities were endless, and each one was more disturbing than the last. This new complexity paralyzed her. Her first instinctual impulse had been to storm over to her son's house, to throw the photographic evidence on the table and expose the lie in a single, explosive confrontation. But now, she hesitated. What would that achieve? It would shatter her son's world in the most brutal way possible. It would detonate a bomb in the middle of his life, leaving him to pick up the radioactive pieces of a marriage he thought was perfect. Was that the right way? Was that the kindest way? Her loyalty was to her son, but the little boy, Noah, she had learned his name from the caregiver's gentle calls on the playground, he was now a factor. He was her grandson, and any action she took would have a direct and lasting impact on his innocent life. She felt trapped, caught between the desire for immediate righteous justice and the need for a more thoughtful, compassionate resolution. She got up and walked over to her bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines of the books that had been her life's work. Books about human connection, about family structures, about the complex and often contradictory ways people behave. She had spent a lifetime studying the rituals and relationships of others from a safe, academic distance. Now, she was caught in the most complex and heartbreaking anthropological study of her life, and there were no textbooks to guide her. She pulled down a heavy photo album from the shelf, the one from Leo's childhood. She sat back down and opened it. There was Leo at 4 years old, a mirror image of the little boy she had seen that afternoon, grinning a toothy grin, his arms covered in mud from playing in the garden. She felt a fresh wave of sorrow wash over her. 5 years of moments like this had been stolen from her son. 5 years of bedtime stories, of scraped knees, of messy, joyful, irreplaceable fatherhood. And in that moment, looking at the picture of her happy, innocent son, the path forward became clear. Her anger at Chloe was real. Her confusion was real. But those emotions were secondary. Her primary duty was not to punish the liar. Her primary duty was to her son and to the grandson she had just discovered. The goal could not be revenge. The goal had to be truth and, if possible, healing. She couldn't just drop a bomb. She had to find a way to gently but firmly dismantle the lie, to minimize the shrapnel, and to help her son build a new reality from the wreckage. The plan couldn't be a declaration of war. It had to be a rescue mission. The decision to act not as an executioner but as a rescuer did not bring Hazel peace. It brought a heavy, profound sense of responsibility. A bomb, even when detonated carefully, is still a bomb. Her mission now was to find a way to dismantle it, piece by piece, with the hope of preserving what was most precious, her son's spirit and her grandson's future. For the next 2 days, she did not leave her study. She surrounded herself with books, not for answers, but for the comfort of their quiet, logical presence. She drank endless cups of chamomile tea and thought. She approached the problem as she would a complex anthropological puzzle, by studying the subjects and identifying the one artifact, the one symbol, that could convey the entire complex truth without a single, accusatory word from her. She ruled out a direct confrontation immediately. It would be her word against Chloe's. It would force Leo into an impossible position, to choose between his mother and his wife, and Hazel knew, with a mother's aching heart, that he would choose Chloe. He would choose the lie, because the lie was the foundation of his happiness. No, she could not be the source of the information. The information had to speak for itself. It had to come from a place of undeniable truth. Her mind kept circling back to the child, to Noah. The injustice done to him was the core of the issue. A boy growing up in a secret world, shuttled between a paid caregiver and a mother who could only visit him on weekends. A boy without a father, even though his father was alive and well and living just an hour away, completely unaware of his existence. The focus had to be on him. The plan had to be about uniting the father and the son. Late on the second night, staring at the old photo album of Leo's childhood, the idea finally came to her. It was simple, elegant, and devastatingly precise. It was not a plan of attack, but a plan of revelation. She would not send the incriminating photo she had taken outside the school. It felt too much like a weapon, an act of aggression. Instead, she would assemble a collection of items, a curated box of truths, a sort of anthropological dig into the secret history of their family. It would be a story told through objects. The next morning, her mission began. Her first stop was a small, charming children's toy store in the old part of town. She walked through the aisles, surrounded by the bright colors and happy chaos of childhood. She wasn't just looking for any toy. She was looking for a ghost. In the back corner, on a dusty shelf, she found it, a sturdy red wooden toy train, almost identical to the one Leo had cherished as a little boy. A toy he had named the Red Comet. He had spent hundreds of hours with that train, and the memory was one of the purest from his childhood. This would be the first artifact. Her second stop was a frame shop. She took with her the photo from the old album, the one of a 4-year-old Leo, his face covered in mud and joy. She had it scanned, carefully restored to remove the signs of age, and printed in a beautiful, high-quality 5x7 format. She chose a simple, elegant silver frame. This would be the second artifact, the face of the past. The final piece was the most difficult, the one that required a line to be crossed, but Hazel knew it was necessary. The truth had to be irrefutable. She called her old friend, Marcus Thompson, the family lawyer. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady, "I need a favor. It is of the utmost personal and legal importance." She explained the situation, her voice never wavering. Marcus, a man who had seen every form of human drama, was silent for a long moment, the shock palpable even over the phone. But he had been Arthur's best friend. His loyalty was to the Johnson family legacy, and he understood immediately that a great injustice had been done. He agreed to help. With his resources, it took less than a day. A discreet private investigator, an expert in public records, was able to obtain a legal, certified copy of Noah's birth certificate. When the document arrived by courier, Hazel opened it with trembling hands, and there it was, in cold black ink. Child's name, Noah Johnson. Mother's name, Chloe Dubois Johnson. Father's name, Leo Arthur Johnson. It was all there. The irrefutable legal proof. This would be the final devastating artifact. That evening, she assembled the box. She chose a simple, elegant gift box, a deep, dignified blue. Inside, on a bed of soft white tissue paper, she placed the 3 items. First, the red wooden train, a symbol of a lost childhood. Next, the framed photograph of 4-year-old Leo, a mirror of the son he never knew he had. And finally, tucked into a sealed envelope, the certified copy of the birth certificate, the undeniable truth. She did not include a note. No accusations, no explanations. The objects themselves would tell the story. This was not an attack from his mother. It was a message from the past, a mirror to the present, and a key to a future he didn't know he had. She addressed the package not to their home, where Chloe might intercept it, but to Leo's private office at his architectural firm. She wrote the address in her neatest, most impersonal hand. She would send it by a bonded courier the next morning. The bomb had been carefully, lovingly, and heartbreakingly assembled. All that was left was to light the fuse and pray for the soul of her son, who was about to be caught in the blast. The next morning, Hazel woke before the dawn. There was no sense of triumph, no thrill of impending victory. There was only a heavy, solemn sense of purpose, the feeling a surgeon must have before a life-altering operation. She knew the procedure was necessary, but she was acutely aware of the pain it would cause. She dressed in simple, understated clothes, drove to a trusted courier service in a different part of the city, and sent the blue box on its way. The clerk asked if she wanted to insure the package. Yes, Hazel replied, a sad, ironic smile touching her lips. Please insure it for the full value. It's irreplaceable. From that moment on, she was powerless. The story was no longer in her hands. The package, a Pandora's box filled with both a devastating truth and the potential for a new beginning, was now making its quiet journey across the city to her son's office. Hazel went home, turned off her phone, and went into her garden. She spent the day with her hands in the soil, pulling weeds, pruning her roses, finding a fragile peace in the simple, honest work. She could not control the storm she had unleashed, but she could tend to her own small corner of the world while she waited for it to pass. The package arrived at Leo's architectural firm just after lunch. His assistant, a bright young woman named Maria, signed for it and placed it on his large, minimalist desk. It was an anomaly among the blueprints and architectural models. A simple, elegant, and completely anonymous blue box. Leo was in a stressful meeting all afternoon, dealing with a difficult client. When he finally returned to his office around 4 o'clock, he was drained and irritable. He saw the box and felt a flicker of annoyance. Probably another unsolicited gift from a vendor, he thought. He sighed, sinking into his chair, and pulled the box towards him, intending to open it quickly and discard its contents. He lifted the lid. The first thing he saw was the bed of soft, white tissue paper. His annoyance softened into mild curiosity. He pushed the paper aside, and then he froze. Lying there was the red wooden train. It wasn't just a toy. It was the toy, the red comet, the one his father had given him for his 3rd birthday, the one he had thought was lost to time, a casualty of a dozen house moves. He reached in, his hand trembling slightly, and picked it up. The weight of it in his palm was so familiar, it was like a phantom limb he had forgotten he had. He ran his thumb over the smooth, worn wood. A flood of memories washed over him. The feel of his father's strong hands guiding his own as they pushed the train across the living room floor. The sound of his mother's laughter. The simple, uncomplicated joy of a childhood that now felt a lifetime away. He smiled, a genuine, wistful smile. Who on earth had sent this? An old relative? A childhood friend? Then his eyes fell on the second item in the box. It was a silver picture frame. He picked it up. He stared at the face of the little boy in the photograph, a boy with a toothy, mischievous grin, his face covered in mud. It was him. He remembered the day that photo was taken, the sheer, unadulterated joy of making mud pies in the garden after a summer rain. His heart ached with a sweet, poignant nostalgia. He placed the photo on his desk next to the train, a beautiful, thoughtful, but deeply mysterious gift. And then he saw it. The last item. A crisp, sealed, cream-colored envelope with no name on it. He picked it up. It felt official, heavy. He turned it over in his hands, a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread beginning to creep up his spine. The train and the photo were a message from the past. He had a terrible feeling that this envelope was a message for the future. With a deep breath, he tore it open. He pulled out the single folded document inside. He saw the official letterhead, the seals, the dense block of legal text, and he began to read. He read the name of the child, Noah Johnson. He read the name of the mother, Chloe Dubois Johnson. And he read the name of the father, Leo Arthur Johnson. The world stopped. The sounds of the city outside his window faded to nothing. The blueprints on his desk blurred into a meaningless scrawl. The only thing that was real was the black ink on the page, the impossible, world-shattering words. He read the document again and again. His brain, the logical, precise architect's brain, refused to process the information. It was a mistake, a forgery, a cruel, elaborate prank. It had to be. But then, he looked at the two artifacts sitting on his desk. The red train, the photo of the 4-year-old boy, and now, the birth certificate of a 4-year-old boy. It wasn't a prank. It was a story, told in 3 parts, a story that made a terrible, devastating kind of sense. The pieces clicked into place, the vague trips, the secret phone calls, the 5 years of lies. And his heart, the heart that had ached for a child for so long, broke into a million pieces. For a long time, Leo didn't move. He just sat there, in the deepening twilight of his office, the birth certificate clutched in his hand, the paper wrinkled from the sheer force of his grip. The 3 objects on his desk, the train, the photo, the document formed a silent, damning tribunal. They were the ghosts of a past he cherished, the mirror of a son he never knew, and the evidence of a lie that had defined his entire adult life. The initial shock, the intellectual refusal to believe, began to recede, replaced by a wave of raw, unfiltered emotion so powerful it threatened to drown him. It began as a hollow ache in the center of his chest, a feeling of profound, cavernous loss. 5 years. 5 years of his son's life had been stolen from him. The first words, the first steps, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories. An entire universe of irreplaceable moments lived by his son without him, while he was just an hour's drive away, mourning a dream he didn't know had come true. The waste of it all, the sheer, pointless, cruel waste of that lost time, was a physical pain. Then, the grief was consumed by a white-hot, blinding rage, a rage directed not just at Chloe, but at himself. How could he have been so blind, so naive, so utterly, willfully ignorant? The red flags his mother had so gently tried to point out, the ones he had so loyally and dismissively brushed aside, now replayed in his mind in excruciating detail. Chloe's theatrical dislike of children, her vague explanations for her absences, his own foolish romantic belief in her perfect, child-free ambition. He hadn't just been deceived, he had been a willing participant in his own deception. He had defended the lie. He had protected it. He had sacrificed his own deepest desire on the altar of a love that was, he now realized, a complete and utter fraud. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He felt a primal urge to smash something, to break the perfect, clean lines of the office that now felt like a cage. He looked at the architectural model for a new library he was designing, a symbol of order and logic, and he wanted to hurl it against the wall. But then, his eyes fell again on the small, framed photo of his 4-year-old self. He saw the innocence in that child's face, the pure joy, and he thought of Noah, the son he had never met, the son who was, at this very moment, likely being put to bed by a paid stranger. The rage didn't disappear, but it shifted, it sharpened, it focused. This was no longer about his own pain, it was about his son. A son who deserved a father, a son who deserved the truth. With a newfound, terrifying clarity, he knew what he had to do. He pulled out his phone. His first call was not to Chloe. He knew he couldn't face her yet, not until he had his own answers. He called the one person in the world he knew he could trust, the person who had, he now realized with a jolt, orchestrated this entire devastating revelation. He called his mother. Hazel answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting. "Hello, Leo," she said, her voice calm and steady, a lighthouse in his storm. "Mom," he choked out, his own voice a broken, unrecognizable thing. "Mom, I got a box." "I know, baby," she said softly. "I know." There was a long silence, filled only by the sound of his ragged breathing. He didn't need to ask if it was true. He didn't need to ask how she found out. He just needed to hear her voice. "What do I do, Mom?" he whispered, the question of a lost little boy, not a grown man. "What do I do now?" "You come home," she said, her voice firm but full of a love so powerful it reached through the phone and held him together. "You come over here. We'll figure out the rest together." He hung up the phone. He carefully, reverently, placed the red train, the photograph, and the birth certificate back into the blue box. He walked out of his office, leaving the lights on, not saying a word to his assistant. He walked out of the building, got into his car, and he drove. He didn't drive to the sleek, modern house he shared with his wife. He drove to the small, warm, book-lined house he had grown up in. He drove home. The confrontation with Chloe could wait. Tonight, he just needed his mother. The drive to his mother's house was a journey through a landscape of ghosts. Every street corner, every familiar oak tree, every park he passed seemed to mock him with memories of a life he thought he understood. He drove on autopilot, his mind a relentless, churning vortex of rage, grief, and 1,000 unanswered questions. When he finally pulled into her driveway, the warm, welcoming light from the living room window seemed like the only real and solid thing in a world that had dissolved into chaos. He didn't even knock. He used the old key that he still kept on his keyring, a key he hadn't used in years, and let himself in. The house smelled exactly as he remembered, a comforting blend of old books, lemon polish, and the faint, sweet scent of the jasmine that grew by the porch. His mother was waiting for him in the living room, sitting in his father's old leather armchair. She didn't rush to him. She just sat there, her expression a mixture of profound love and deep, shared sorrow, and opened her arms. And for the first time since he was a small boy, Leo completely fell apart. He collapsed onto the floor in front of her, burying his face in her lap, and he sobbed. Not quiet, dignified tears, but great, heaving, body-racking sobs of a man whose heart had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He cried for the son he never knew, for the 5 years of stolen memories. He cried for the wife he thought he loved, who was now a monstrous stranger. And he cried for his own blindness, for the fool he had been for so long. Hazel just held him. She stroked his hair, murmuring the same soothing words she had used when he was a child with a scraped knee. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't offer advice. She just absorbed his pain, her presence a silent, unshakable anchor in his storm. She let him grieve. After a long time, the sobs subsided into a ragged, exhausted silence. He finally sat up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. "How long have you known?" "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I've had my suspicions for a while," she answered honestly. "But I saw him, Leo, with my own eyes, just last week," and she told him everything. She told him about the suspicious phone call, the financial records, the lie about the art fair. She told him about her vigil outside the school, about the little boy with his father's smile, about Chloe's desperate, loving embrace. She laid out the facts calmly, logically, not as an accusation, but as a shared, painful truth they now had to face together. As he listened, his grief began to harden once more into a cold, clear resolve. "What kind of a person does this?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. "What kind of a mother hides a child from his own father?" "A very scared one, I imagine," Hazel said, her anthropologist's mind always seeking a deeper understanding. "Or a very selfish one, perhaps both. But that is her story to tell, Leo. Our story now is about that little boy. It's about Noah." The name on his lips was a revelation. "Noah," he repeated, testing the weight of it. "My son." A new kind of light began to dawn in his eyes, a fierce, protective fire that burned through the fog of his pain. "I have to see him, Mom. I have to go to him. Now." "I know, baby," she said, "but not like this, not in anger. This has to be done carefully. For Noah's sake, we need a plan." And so, for the rest of the night, they planned. It was no longer a rescue mission for Leo. It was a rescue mission for Noah. With Hazel's strategic mind and Leo's intimate knowledge of Chloe's routines, they pieced together a strategy. The goal was not a dramatic, explosive confrontation. The goal was simple: for a father to finally meet his son. The plan was this. Chloe's secret life revolved around her weekends in Northwood. Leo knew she always went to the same small grocery store on Saturday morning to stock up the apartment for the weekend. That would be the place. It was a neutral, public space. He would go there, alone. He would not bring lawyers, not yet. He would not bring anger. He would just bring the truth. The next morning, Leo woke up on the sofa in his mother's living room, the first rays of dawn streaming through the window. He felt hollowed out, exhausted, but also filled with a terrifying, electric sense of purpose. He showered, borrowed one of his late father's old comfortable sweaters, and drank the strong black coffee his mother had made for him. He looked at his mother, at the quiet, unshakable strength in her eyes, and felt a surge of gratitude so profound it almost brought him to tears again. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for not letting me stay blind." "I will always be on your side, Leo," she said, squeezing his hand. "Now go meet your son." The drive to Northwood was a pilgrimage into an unknown country. It was a town that had existed just an hour away for 5 years, a secret repository of his own life that he had never known. The anger and grief were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they were overshadowed by a new, more powerful emotion, a desperate, heart-stopping anticipation. He was about to meet his son. The thought was both terrifying and the most beautiful thing he had ever imagined. He found the small, upscale grocery store easily. It was the kind of place that sold organic vegetables and artisanal cheeses, a perfect backdrop for Chloe's carefully curated secret life. He parked his car at the far end of the lot, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He didn't have to wait long. At 10 o'clock, just as his mother had predicted, Chloe's silver SUV pulled into a spot near the entrance. Leo watched as she got out. She was dressed in the Northwood version of herself jeans, a simple t-shirt, her hair in a ponytail. She looked relaxed, happy. And then, the back door opened, and Noah scrambled out. He was even smaller than Leo had imagined, a whirlwind of energy in a little red jacket. He had Leo's curly hair. Seeing him in person, a real, living, breathing child, not just a name on a piece of paper, was like a physical blow. The air rushed out of Leo's lungs. That was his son. His son. He gave them a few minutes. He watched them walk into the store, Chloe placing Noah in the child seat of the shopping cart, their heads bent together as they looked at a box of cereal. Then, with a deep breath that did little to calm his shaking hands, he got out of his car and walked towards the entrance. He found them in the dairy aisle. Chloe was looking at a selection of yogurts, her back to him. Noah was sitting in the cart, swinging his little legs, happily babbling to his stuffed dinosaur. Leo walked up slowly, his footsteps silent on the polished linoleum floor. He stopped directly behind the cart. "He looks just like I did at his age," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a collapsing universe. Chloe froze. Her entire body went rigid. For a long, terrible moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she turned. When her eyes met his, her face went completely white, a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The color drained from her cheeks, and she looked as if she had seen a ghost. "Leo," she whispered, her voice a strangled, barely audible sound. What are you doing here?" Leo didn't answer her. His eyes were locked on the little boy in the cart. Noah, sensing the sudden tension, had stopped babbling. He was looking at Leo with a child's wide, curious, and completely innocent eyes. They were his own eyes, staring back at him from a different time. Leo felt his carefully constructed wall of composure begin to crumble. A tear escaped and traced a hot path down his cheek. He reached out a trembling hand and gently, so gently, brushed a stray curl off the boy's forehead. The child didn't flinch. He just watched him with that same, steady, curious gaze. "His name is Noah," Leo said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He's 4 years old. He likes dinosaurs. And he has my eyes." He finally looked at Chloe, and the pain and betrayal of the last 24 hours was raw in his voice. "Why, Chloe?" he asked, the question a simple, heartbreaking plea. "Why would you do this to me? To him?" Chloe just stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently. No lies, no excuses left to give. The truth was there. between them, in the form of a small boy sitting in a shopping cart. The game was over. And in that moment, surrounded by the mundane, brightly lit world of a grocery store, their marriage, their life, their entire world of lies came to a quiet, devastating end. The weeks that followed were a painful, legal blur. Chloe, stripped of her lies, did not fight. She gave Leo a full confession, a tangled, pathetic story of her own fears and insecurities, fear of motherhood derailing her career, fear of losing her identity. Leo listened, but he could find no forgiveness in his heart, not yet. The divorce was swift. He, with his mother's full support, fought for and was granted full custody of Noah. Chloe, facing public and legal repercussions, moved to a different city, a ghost from their past. The real story, the important story, began the day Leo brought Noah home, not to the cold, modern house he had shared with Chloe, but to his mother's warm, book-lined house. The first few days were awkward, a dance between a grieving father and a confused little boy who didn't understand why his world had been turned upside down. But Hazel was their bridge. She filled the house with the smell of baking cookies. She read them stories from the old, beloved books from Leo's childhood. She taught Leo how to be a father, not with words, but with her own quiet, steady example of unconditional love. And slowly, beautifully, a new family began to take shape. Leo discovered the joy of pushing his son on a swing, of kissing a scraped knee, of falling asleep with a small, warm body curled up against his. Noah, in turn, discovered the unwavering love of a father and a grandmother. One sunny afternoon, months later, Hazel was in her garden, watching as Leo and Noah worked together, their heads bent over a small patch of dirt, planting a tomato seedling. Noah, his face and hands covered in mud, looked up at his father and grinned a wide, toothy, joyful grin. It was the same grin from the old photograph in the silver frame. And in that moment, Hazel knew that her rescue mission was a success. The lie had been dismantled. The truth, though painful in its arrival, had healed them. The broken pieces of their family had not just been put back together. They had been reformed into something new, something stronger, something real. And it was beautiful.